You're not strong, you're just comfortable. You've been taught to interpret your calm as control, that because you're not unraveling in front of others, it means you've mastered something. But this is the first deception. Stability, when it's never tested, is just a pause between storms. It is not strength. It is an intermission, a fragile silence easily mistaken for peace. And in this silence, the ego builds a myth that your lack of collapse is a sign of fortitude. That because life hasn't demanded your pain, your soul must be sturdy. This is how people become soft while thinking they're hardened. You begin to build your identity around absence, the absence of chaos, the absence of pain, the absence of breakdown. But absence is not evidence, it's delay. And that delay becomes dangerous when you start to believe it's proof. The mind craves narratives that soothe its fears. It wants to believe that endurance is something you inherit by simply surviving the days. That as long as you're not panicking, breaking down, or visibly failing, it must mean you're winning. But endurance isn't a state of existence. It's a skill. And like all skills, it demands confrontation, resistance, pressure. You don't build calluses by brushing your skin. You build them by being torn. You don't develop mental strength by protecting your peace at all costs. You develop it by stepping into discomfort, willingly, repeatedly, until your spirit stops flinching. Without that process, you are untrained. And untrained does not mean pure, it means unready. What most people call inner strength is often just emotional insulation. A layer of behaviors and routines and systems designed to keep the hard things at a distance. And the more efficient these systems become, the easier it is to mistake insulation for resilience. You respond calmly to inconvenience and call it stoicism. You hide your feelings and call it emotional control. You avoid confrontation and call it maturity. But deep down, your mind knows the difference. It knows that it hasn't truly been tested. It knows that every confident step is secretly hoping the ground doesn't shift. That every strong answer is still rehearsed, not lived. The illusion of inner fortitude doesn't just mislead you, it weakens you. It creates a false sense of security that makes you stop training, stop confronting, stop sharpening. You start measuring your capacity by how little you react, not by how deeply you understand your own reactions. And in that stillness, strength begins to rot. You become a structure with no foundation, a calm surface hiding hollow ground. And when life inevitably applies pressure, that structure doesn't bend, it shatters. This is why some people collapse under losses, others seem to survive. It's not because they were fragile by nature, but because they were never forced to grow past their illusion. They lived their lives unshaken, and when the shaking came, their strength was theoretical. No scars, no preparation, just beliefs. The body can't lift a weight it's never touched. The mind can't handle a storm it's never stood in. That's not philosophy, that's physics. There's a reason the Stoics trained their minds to lose. Why they imagined the death of their children, the burning of their homes, the betrayal of their friends. Not to live in paranoia, but to strip away illusion, to rehearse ruin until they no longer feared it, because they understood this truth. If you wait until the fire starts to prepare your soul, you'll be too late. Strength is not reactive, it's preemptive, and those who wait to be tested often fail the test. You don't become strong by surviving ease. You become strong by confronting difficulty before it arrives, by choosing moments of friction in a world addicted to softness, by doing hard things not because you have to, but because you need to remember what you're made of. You don't need a crisis to grow, but you do need to stop hiding in comfort and calling it resilience. So ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly tested? When did you last tremble and keep walking? When did you last feel pain that didn't stop you, fear that didn't control you, uncertainty that didn't break you? And if the answer is too long ago, or worse, never, then maybe you're not strong. Maybe you're just untouched. Strength is not what keeps you standing when the wind is still. It's what keeps you walking when the storm begins. And you don't get that strength by thinking. You get it by training, voluntarily, repeatedly, until illusion dies and truth takes its place. Until you know, not believe, know, that you can fall and rise again, not because you hope you can, but because you've done it, over and over, quietly, without applause, You've built a life that feels solid, predictable days, a safe environment, a familiar rhythm. You know what's coming next, and that comforts you. But what if that comfort is the very thing that's keeping you from becoming who you're meant to be? What if your stability, instead of being a foundation, is actually a ceiling? There's a danger that comes with ease, not because it hurts, but because it doesn't. And what doesn't hurt doesn't provoke growth. It lulls you, it flatters you. It makes you believe that safety is a sign of success, when in truth, it may be the beginning of decline. The human spirit wasn't designed for permanence. It was designed to adapt, evolve, resist, and overcome. But when everything becomes stable, when nothing threatens the system, the soul begins to forget how to fight. The body forgets how to endure. The mind forgets how to stretch. What you call peace may just be the absence of resistance, and absence of resistance breeds atrophy. That's the irony of false stability. It feels good while it quietly makes you weaker. You weren't made to stay where it's warm. The greatest minds in history knew this. The Stoics sought cold rivers, hard roads, emotional loss, not because they loved suffering, but because they hated illusion. They knew that a soft life makes for a fragile spirit. When your life becomes too comfortable, it stops testing your boundaries. And without those tests, you never meet your real limits. You stay inside the same behavioral loop, rehearsing the same responses, never realizing how much you've stopped growing. The world hasn't made you strong. It's just stopped challenging you. The tragedy is that this false stability feels like home. It's seductive. You decorate it with routines, protect it with excuses, justify it with plans. You call it discipline, but it's actually defense. A defense against uncertainty, against risk, against the edge where growth happens. You become a prisoner of patterns, not because you're incapable of more, but because you've stopped needing more. And without need, the fire dies. There's a kind of safety that should scare you. The kind where nothing pushes back, where nothing calls you higher, where every day feels like a copy of the last, not because you're consistent, but because you're stuck. And in that stillness, you start mistaking control for strength. You think because you're calm, you're powerful. But calm can also mean numb, and numbness is not mastery. It's stagnation with a mask. Many people think they've conquered life because they've removed uncertainty. But life isn't something to be conquered. It's something to be entered fully, to be stretched by, to be changed through. You can build walls around yourself and call it wisdom. But eventually those walls become a cage, and no matter how beautiful that cage is, it will shrink you. Not all prisons have bars. Some have sofas, some have routines, some have predictable days and uninterrupted nights. But all of them rob you of one thing: the friction that forces you to evolve. Real strength doesn't come from holding everything together in a controlled environment. It comes from being broken open and rebuilt again and again. It comes from stepping into the unfamiliar, the uncertain, the uncomfortable. Not because you enjoy it, but because you know what's on the other side. And the longer you stay inside false stability, the more that other side becomes unreachable. Your comfort zone is not your home, it's your hiding place. And the longer you stay hidden, the more the world forgets your name. And worse, the more you forget your own. Because you were not made to repeat. You were made to rise. So ask yourself sincerely, ruthlessly, what have you called stability that's actually avoidance? What part of you has stopped growing because your life no longer demands it? What would happen if the structure you rely on vanished tomorrow? Would you adapt or would you collapse? It's easy to love peace, but don't mistake the silence of the cage for the freedom of the open road. One keeps you safe, the other keeps you alive. Convenience has become a virtue in this age, but beneath its polished surface hides a truth that most refuse to face. It often serves as a mask for fear, a fear of exposure, a fear of failure, a fear of discomfort that reveals how unprepared we truly are. What looks like smart decision-making may in fact be careful avoidance. What you call efficient may just be a clever escape route from your own growth. The truth is brutal. Many people have not become strong. They've simply become skilled at running away without appearing to run. There's a certain cowardice that lives within comfort. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It disguises itself with clean calendars, optimized schedules, convenient choices, and carefully crafted excuses. You say you didn't go because the timing wasn't right. You say you didn't speak because it wasn't your place. You say you didn't try because the odds weren't in your favor. But behind every polished explanation lives an impulse you won't name: fear. The kind that doesn't stop your breath, but steals your fire. The kind that doesn't paralyze you, but gently redirects your path toward what's easy, what's certain, what won't test you. You've been taught that progress can be painless, that you can avoid the sharp edges of growth and still become resilient. But resilience doesn't come from optimization. It comes from resistance, from hardship, from things going wrong and you standing still anyway. But when your life becomes built around comfort, around efficiency, around control, you begin to forget what resistance feels like. You stop seeking out the hard thing. You start choosing comfort over confrontation and labeling it maturity. But let's be honest, maturity isn't the absence of emotion or risk. It's the capacity to stand inside both and remain grounded. And convenience doesn't help you build that. It removes the triggers, dulls the lessons, and creates a psychological illusion that because you are unshaken, you are whole. But a calm life is not always a courageous one. In fact, it rarely is, because courage doesn't show up in systems. It shows up in chaos, and chaos rarely visits a life insulated by avoidance. We live in a world that glorifies ease, fast food, one-click gratification, digital escapes. We've traded effort for efficiency, wisdom for information, discipline for dopamine. And while all of this makes us feel more in control, it's quietly making us spiritually hollow. We no longer confront what makes us uncomfortable. We swipe it away, scroll past it, avoid the conversation, change the subject, and every time we do, a little piece of our strength withers. Not because we're broken, but because we're not tested. Avoidance doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like productivity. You stay busy with safe things. You chase goals that don't ask too much of your soul. You hide behind schedules and pretend it's structure. But deep down, you feel the ache of the thing you're avoiding. You hear the whisper of the challenge you refuse to accept. You feel the dullness that creeps into a life without risk. And still, you protect your convenience as if it were sacred. But nothing sacred is soft forever. Growth has always lived on the edge of fear. That's where you meet the limits of who you think you are. That's where your lungs fill with fire and your eyes see clearly. But convenience keeps you away from the edge. It keeps you in the center, surrounded by certainty, comfort, and control. And while that center might feel safe, it is not alive. It is static, predictable, unmoved. And you were not born to remain unmoved. You've mastered the art of staying inside your limits without ever admitting they exist. You've built a life that demands very little from your core. And then you wonder why you feel untested, why your victories feel shallow, why you crave something you can't name. It's because your soul was designed to expand and you've kept it folded. So here's the question. Are you really living with courage or just avoiding anything that might reveal your fragility? Is your convenience a tool you control or a trap that controls you? If you want real strength, stop choosing ease. Stop confusing silence with peace. Stop mistaking safety for power. Step toward the thing you've been avoiding. That's where your fear is, and that's where your freedom begins. The moment life finally demands something from you, it doesn't knock. It doesn't wait for your schedule to clear. It shows up unannounced, unapologetic, and indifferent to how prepared you think you are. And when it does, it exposes everything, especially the truth you've buried under comfort, that you've never actually trained your endurance. You've lived a life protected from pressure, buffered by systems, padded by routines. And because of that, when something finally goes wrong, it doesn't just disrupt you, it unravels you. Endurance isn't a concept, it's a conditioning. It doesn't develop in your thoughts, and it develops in your nervous system, in your responses, in your choices when it hurts. But most people never train that. They rehearse the idea of strength in their heads without ever stepping into a space where that strength is needed. They consume content about mindset, read about resilience, repeat mantras in the mirror. But when reality applies real weight, their muscles collapse. Not because they were weak, but because they were untrained. That's what a life without resistance does. It doesn't just keep you comfortable, it keeps you unprepared. It teaches your nervous system that nothing will ever push too hard. It teaches your emotions that they don't need to stretch. It teaches your spirit that staying the same is enough. And so the moment chaos enters, it feels foreign. Your body panics. Your breath shortens. Your mind looks for escape routes instead of solutions. Not because you're broken, but because you've never built the mental calluses to endure. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology could measure it. They practiced voluntary hardship not for pain's sake, but for clarity. They understood that controlled discomfort is the only way to expand your threshold, that without it, you live inside the same fragile limits, convinced you're capable until you're not, because you don't rise to your expectations. You fall to your level of training. And if your life has never demanded resilience, you've never truly built it. You've been taught to chase ease, to eliminate struggle, to build a world that doesn't test you. But strength without testing is theory, and theory doesn't save you in crisis. When betrayal hits, when the diagnosis arrives, when your world tilts, that's when you find out whether your mind has ever tasted fire, whether your spirit has been taught to stand not in comfort but in chaos. You may think you've endured, but what you've done is survived repetition. You've maintained, you've performed, but you haven't pushed. Not really. You haven't stayed when it hurt. You haven't fought when it felt pointless. You haven't breathed through the panic long enough to find the second wind. And so your endurance remains hypothetical, strong in theory, fragile in practice. Every day you avoid discomfort is a day you reinforce fragility. You tell your mind it's okay to stay untested. You tell your emotions they can remain shallow. You tell your body it doesn't need to learn pressure. But when the storm comes, and it will, your lack of training becomes the cost. You don't just suffer the pain, you suffer the shock of being unready for it. The modern world won't train you unless you ask for it. It will give you comfort disguised as peace. It will give you ease disguised as freedom. And if you're not careful, it will make you believe you're prepared simply because nothing has gone wrong yet. But nothing going wrong is not a sign of strength. It's a delay. And if you don't build now, you'll break later. So how do you reverse it? You introduce discomfort before life does. You stop outsourcing difficulty. You stop curating your day to avoid friction. You stay a little longer in the silence. You do one more rep when your body says quit. You ask the question you're afraid to ask. You face what you'd rather avoid. Not all at once, but consistently, intentionally. Because endurance doesn't need drama. It needs repetition under weight. That's how you become ready. Not for a perfect life, but for a real one that will test you, bend you, demand from you. And if you've trained, you won't break. You'll bend and reset, fall and rise. Not because you hoped you could, but because you've done it before in silence with no applause. Just you and the fire, and the strength that only the fire gives. There's a type of decay that doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself with crisis or collapse. It moves quietly, subtly, wearing the face of stability. You function, you work, you smile when necessary, but inside something is dull. Something is slow. Something that once moved like fire now feels like smoke. This isn't depression. It isn't sadness. It's a form of spiritual inertia, a slow freeze of the soul, a kind of stillness that looks calm from the outside, but is actually corrosion on the inside. And the worst part is, you almost never notice it when you're in it. Emotional inertia is not the absence of feeling. It's the repeated suppression of what needs to be felt. It's what happens when you avoid confrontation long enough that your emotional muscles atrophy. You stop speaking when something hurts. You stop asking when you're confused. You stop crying when you're overwhelmed. You numb, distract, redirect. And little by little, you lose the sharpness of presence. You don't feel broken. You just stop feeling deep. You laugh, but it doesn't echo. You cry, but it doesn't cleanse. You touch, but it doesn't reach your core. And so you drift, unshaken, but untouched. You've been conditioned to believe that calm is the goal, that neutrality is wisdom, that emotional silence is maturity. But there's a difference between stillness and stagnation. Stillness is a choice. Stagnation is a consequence. When you numb yourself long enough, you don't become wise. You become detached from life. Detached from grief, from joy, from hunger, from hope. Not because you're above it, but because you've unconsciously trained your system to reject movement. because movement might lead to pain. And pain, in a world that worships comfort, is seen as failure. The Stoics never taught emotional suppression. They taught clarity. They didn't run from feeling. They examined it, questioned it, mastered it through exposure. They believed that fear must be looked at, not buried, that anger must be tamed through understanding, not ignored through silence. They knew that emotion, when avoided, doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes heaviness, numbness, distance. You think you're strong because nothing moves you. But what if that's not strength? What if that's a warning? There's a reason people feel empty even when life is full. It's not always about lack. Sometimes it's about absence of depth. You stop responding to beauty. You stop being stirred by truth. You hear powerful words and they bounce off your chest instead of cutting into you. That's not resilience. That's emotional callousness, a slow detachment from your own aliveness. And the worst part is, it doesn't hurt. It simply flattens everything. And in that flattening, you lose the sharp edge that made you human. You need emotion, not as your master, but as your compass. You need the trembling that comes before a hard choice, the ache that comes after a loss, the thrill that arrives when you're fully alive. Because all of those things remind you that you're in motion, that your soul hasn't gone cold. But comfort tells you otherwise. It tells you to stay even, stay neutral, stay safe. And that message, repeated over years, creates a person who is outwardly composed and inwardly faded. Emotional inertia doesn't just rob you of pain, it robs you of meaning. Because the same mechanism that blocks grief also blocks wonder. The same barrier that stops sadness also muffles awe. You can't selectively numb. You numb one thing, you start numbing everything, until you're left with a version of yourself that's perfectly functioning and deeply unfulfilled. You want to feel alive again. Start letting yourself feel again. Stop editing your emotions to fit into the image of composure. Stop silencing the ache when it rises. Let it say what it needs to say. Let it break something. Let it clean something out. Because you're not a machine. You're not here to perform consistency. You're here to experience the full weight of being, the high, the low, the loss, the love. This doesn't make you fragile. It makes you awake. And awakening hurts at first. It shocks the system. It reminds you of everything you've buried. But beneath that pain is motion. And beneath that motion is power. The kind of power that doesn't need control, only honesty. And from that honesty, the strength you've been missing starts to return. Quietly, fiercely, fully. There was a time when becoming an adult meant more than paying bills and following routines. It meant facing something real, something hard, something that stripped away the illusions and demanded the emergence of character. Every ancient society understood this. They created trials, rites of passage, initiations that broke the comfort of childhood and forced a person to meet themselves, raw, scared, and unready. These trials weren't random cruelty, they were sacred, because without them, strength stays theoretical. Without them, the soul stays soft. But we've buried those trials. We've replaced them with grades and deadlines and social norms that don't ask for your core, just your compliance. The ancient threshold has been removed, and in its place, we now have adults who have never truly been tested. People with jobs, titles, even power, who have never bled for a truth, never lost sleep for an ideal, never stood alone and still chosen the harder path. And they feel it. They feel the hollow space where the trial was supposed to be. They feel the weight of a man or woman's responsibilities without ever having earned the resilience those responsibilities require. The death of the primitive trial didn't just take away pain, it took away transformation. Because trials weren't about punishment, they were about rebirth. They stripped away everything artificial and left only the real. They shattered your identity so you could rebuild it with intention. But in a world where everything is softened, shortened, and served through screens, the fire that once purified now flickers in the background, ignored, until crisis forces it upon us. We are a generation that reads about warriors but hasn't been through war. That admires stoicism but doesn't practice hardship. That quotes resilience but has never been broken enough to build it. And that gap creates suffering, quiet suffering. A sense that something essential is missing, even if everything looks fine. Because it is missing, the trial is missing, The moment that pushes you beyond your name, your image, your comfort, and into something earned. And without that, you never really know who you are. What the ancients understood and what we've forgotten is that identity without fire is flimsy. You don't know your values until they're threatened. You don't know your strength until you're spent. You don't know your mind until panic tries to take it. These moments aren't curses, they're clarifiers, and we need them now more than ever. The mind that has never faced risk becomes entitled. The heart that has never risked love becomes guarded. The soul that has never fought for meaning becomes restless. You can't solve that restlessness with comfort. You can't ease it with routine. You need the weight, the struggle, the encounter with your own limits. That's what the trial gives you. And that's why its absence is not mercy, it's neglect. You were never meant to become whole by accident. You were meant to be broken open by something greater than yourself, and then, in the ruins of who you thought you were, to build who you actually are. But if you've never faced a night without light, if you've never tasted the edge of your endurance, if you've never stood in silence with nothing to prove and still refused to quit, then the trial hasn't happened yet. And the voice inside you that says there must be more is not wrong. It's ancient memory. It's soul memory. It's the whisper of the fire calling you back. This is not about seeking pain for its own sake. It's about not fearing it. It's about choosing depth over comfort, growth over ease. It's about realizing that in the softening of society, you must become your own initiator. You must create the trial, design the discomfort, walk into the fire of your own making, because no one is coming to carry you across that threshold. It's yours alone. But once you walk through it, you'll finally stop asking who you are, because you'll know. And more than that, you'll trust it. There's a type of violence that doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't shout. It doesn't strike. It whispers through your life like a slow fog, eroding your hunger, your clarity, your edge. It comes wrapped in softness, hidden in convenience, dressed like success. A life without friction may sound like paradise, but it is often a silent execution of the very parts of you that make you powerful. Because when nothing resists you, nothing refines you. When everything is easy, nothing transforms you. And when all your needs are met without struggle, you slowly forget what it means to deserve anything at all. Ease has a strange effect on the soul. At first, it feels like reward, like you've finally made it. The days unfold with predictability. There are no more major crises, no tight deadlines, no uncertain risks. You can breathe. But after a while, something else begins to rise. A restlessness without direction, a fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, a feeling of being lost even though nothing is missing. That feeling is your soul suffocating, not from pain, but from the absence of it, from the absence of contrast, of weight, of real demand. When nothing challenges you, nothing awakens you. You stop being moved by beauty because you no longer need it to survive. You stop being stirred by truth because you've learned how to live without questioning anything. You stop pushing yourself, not because you've arrived, but because no one is pushing back. This is the quiet violence of a life too easy. It doesn't hurt you directly. It simply numbs your instincts. It makes you slow, comfortable, predictable, and slowly, quietly, it puts your purpose to sleep. There is no creation without pressure. There is no transformation without resistance. The fire you avoid is the same fire that would have forged your identity. The chaos you've eliminated is the same chaos that could have taught you how to build inner order. But we've grown so good at designing comfort that we no longer realize what it's costing us. We think we've upgraded our lives, but in reality, many of us have just made them quieter prisons. Prisons where nothing tests us, so nothing grows us. You were not made to live inside neutrality. You were made to burn, to be shaken, to struggle for something that matters. You were made for sacred friction, the kind that scrapes away your ego and reveals your truth. The kind that doesn't feel good but leaves you sharper, cleaner, more awake. And every time you run from that friction, you run from your own evolution. You run from your edge. You run from the parts of you that are still raw, still wild, still capable of becoming something new. A life without challenge is a life without texture. It's smooth but slippery. You can't hold on to anything because nothing demands your grip. You can't feel anything because nothing pierces deep enough to provoke a response. And over time, this smoothness becomes a lie. It tells you you're content, but you're not. You're just numb. It tells you you've found peace, but you haven't. You've just stopped growing. And in that stagnation, your mind begins to forget its own power. We often think suffering destroys us, but that's only true when we're unprepared. When we've been lulled by ease, pampered by routine, made passive by convenience. That's when suffering overwhelms. But when we've trained for it, when we've welcomed controlled hardship into our lives, it becomes a clarifier. It strips away what's unnecessary. It sharpens intention. It returns your energy to its rightful place: movement, action, decision. If your life feels dull, it's not because you lack achievement, it's because you lack contrast. Without pain, pleasure loses meaning. Without effort, reward becomes empty. Without sacrifice, nothing has weight. And the soul, stripped of weight, floats, aimless, anxious, disconnected. You don't need a crisis to feel alive, but you do need tension. You need something to press against. You need resistance, not because you're weak, but because you're meant to be strong. And strength is not born from ease. You've been told to chase freedom, but freedom without purpose is a curse. It becomes wandering. Freedom must be anchored in something higher, a path, a fire, a responsibility, something that makes your strength necessary. Otherwise, it dissolves into indulgence. And indulgence, unchecked, is the fastest way to forget who you are. So if your life is easy, ask yourself what it's costing you. Ask what parts of your character have gone unused, what inner weapons have dulled, what sacred ambitions have been postponed in the name of comfort. Then do something hard. Not for the pain, but for the presence it demands, for the clarity it creates, for the life it reawakens. You have two choices. You either step willingly into the fire that tempers you, or one day, the fire will come uninvited and consume everything you've built. There is no life without pain. The only question is whether that pain is chosen or imposed. The fire you walk into willingly, the discipline, the honesty, the confrontation, the discomfort, that fire transforms you. It makes you sharper. It makes you clearer. It makes you real. But the fire that finds you when you've done nothing to prepare, that fire destroys. It doesn't burn to shape. It burns to expose what was never solid in the first place. People think they can escape this choice. They think if they stay quiet, stay safe, stay efficient, the chaos of life will forget them. But life doesn't forget. It waits. It waits for the perfect moment when your illusions are highest and your readiness is lowest. And then it strikes. Not out of cruelty, but out of truth. Because everything that isn't tested is temporary, and everything that's temporary eventually gets torn away. You must choose your fire. Choose the conversation you're afraid to have. Choose the task you keep postponing. Choose the silence that makes you uncomfortable. Choose the morning that starts before the sun. Choose the habit that confronts your weakness. Choose the failure that teaches you more than success ever could. Choose the version of you that doesn't flinch when pressure rises. Choose the life that scares you just enough to make you pay attention. Because if you don't choose your fire, comfort will choose it for you. And it always chooses destruction disguised as ease. We often believe that we're safe because nothing has gone wrong. But that's not safety, that's delay. And the longer you delay your confrontation with discomfort, the less prepared you become to handle it when it finally arrives. You're not avoiding the fire, you're giving it more fuel. You want to live a meaningful life? Then you have to stop negotiating with your fear. You have to stop asking it for permission. You have to stop waiting for the right time. The fire is the right time. The tension is the right time. That resistance you keep interpreting as a reason to turn back, that is the signal to move forward. That is the moment that separates those who speak about strength from those who embody it. This isn't about glorifying pain. This is about reclaiming power. You reclaim it the moment you stop letting ease decide your path. The moment you stop outsourcing responsibility to your circumstances. The moment you stop being shocked by hardship and start seeing it as your training ground. Every Stoic knew this. Marcus Aurelius knew it in the silence of his chamber while the empire strained. Epictetus knew it in chains before he knew it in words. Seneca knew it as he bled, choosing dignity over begging. They all chose their fire, and because of that, their souls didn't shatter. They crystallized. You don't need to burn in public. You don't need to suffer dramatically. You just need to walk into the thing you keep avoiding. One step, one decision, one act of courage that tells the universe, I am not afraid to be refined. I am not afraid to let go of who I was for the sake of who I could become. I will not wait for tragedy to wake me. I will wake myself. You don't rise by avoiding discomfort. You rise by moving through it until it bows to you. Until the very thing that once threatened your peace becomes the reason you have it. That's how strength is earned. That's how fire becomes light. And if this message found a place in you, let it be the start of your own fire. Subscribe and leave your mark in the comments. Not for the algorithm, but as proof to yourself and that you chose to wake up.